The truth about population. Hi, I'm Einar Tangen. Let's get real. For years, there has been a constant speculation about when India's population would pass China's. Today, CNN, CBS, ABC, Fox, Reuters, FTAP, The Wall Street Journal, and the New York Times blanket the airwaves and print media, heralding India's population boom as an event that will change the world's center of economic gravity, implying that India's population boom will eclipse China's economically as part of some regional struggle for supremacy. Let's have a reality check. There are three things going on. First, a false attempt to equate population growth with economic development. Second, an attempt to portray India and China as locked in an economic and political military struggle for supremacy. Third, an attempt to use India as a doorstop to China's economic rise, straight out of the colonial divide and control playbook. So let's get into it. Does population growth automatically lead to economic development? Simple answer, no. If it did, India and Africa, each with 1.4 billion people, would be among the world's leader in per capita income and development, rather than trailing it. Large populations do have benefits, but also challenges. The benefits for industries and companies that use labor-intensive, cheap labor are clear, but the benefits for workers and their countries are limited unless they are able to upgrade their economies internally beyond being just sweatshops. Large populations create demand, but there are different kinds of demand depending on where the country is developmentally. For example, in terms of energy consumption per person, the US has 4.25% of the world's population, but consumes 17% of the world's energy. The European Union has 6% of the world's population, but uses only 10.4% of the world's energy. China has 17.7% of the world's population and consumes 25% of the world's energy, while India, also 17.7% of the world's population, consumes 6.1% of the world's energy. Energy consumption in the US and EU reflect their lifestyle choices. Energy consumption in China and India reflect their industrialization and developmental levels. Large populations do create large markets, but as it can be seen, high-income countries consume more resources and have more choices, whereas low-income countries focus on necessities and have fewer choices. This leads to my second point. The attempt to portray India and China as locked in an economic and political military struggle for supremacy. While there are border and spheres of influence tensions, both countries are civilization states with no desire to invade the other. China was able to use its demographic dividend to educate its people, increase longevity, improve healthcare, provide pensions, eliminate extreme poverty, build infrastructure, and industrialize. But China has economic and development tools that India does not. As Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson Wang Wenbin pointed out, when talking about demographic dividends, quote, when assessing a country's demographic dividend, we need to look at not just the size, but also the quality of its workforce. Size matters, but what matters more is talent resources. Nearly 900 million of the 1.4 billion Chinese are of working age and on average have received 10.9 years of education, end quote. In India, there are approximately the same number of working age people, but the majority have not been educated beyond the primary education level. The reality is China and India, like every other country, have their own matrix of cultures, language, histories, as well as different legal, political, economic, and social systems, and therefore will have different economic and political paths. Rather than locked in a titanic struggle. They are simply trying to find their own way in a world dominated by aging colonial interest, intent on maintaining their own hegemony. This brings us to the third point, an attempt to use the colonial playbook to divide and conquer. The realpolitik of America's strategy is simply to maintain its hegemony. The Quad alliance is aimed at pitting India against China. But the question is, how does it benefit India? China is a neighbor. It will not disappear. The US, Australia, and Japan are not neighbors. Their interests are more about using India rather than supporting it. If they were truly interested in development of India, there would be substantial investments, meaningful trade agreements. Why, with the Quad in place, would the US create AUKUS? Is there a line between native English-speaking nations and the rest of the world? The Five Eyes intelligence network suggests there is. Ironically, the combined populations of Canada, UK, Australia, and New Zealand is about 130 million people, whereas India has over 125 million people who speak English, actually second only to the US. So as you look at the headlines and the narratives that population equates to development and that China and India are locked in some sort of struggle for supremacy, keep in mind that India and China are two different economies, even if they have the same number of people. How India rises may borrow from many models, but it will be based on the unique cultural, political, and economic history and systems of the country, not competitions with the US, China, or any other country, and not as a pawn in a game of global interests, because India has its own path.